Welcome to the Gaudium et Spes podcast, where every other week we bring you Catholic teachings and stories of faith from people throughout the Diocese of Pensacola-Tallahassee. Now, here are your hosts, Suzanne McNinch and Chez Filippini.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Gaudium et Spes podcast. Just a reminder, if you didn't catch our last one, we caught up with Jacob Hyman from Steubenville, Ohio, an FSU grad who shared his amazing conversion story and also his work as a new urbanist up in the Northeast. So that was a really cool podcast. As you can see, we're back here in the studio. I've got my long-lost brother in arms here in the Pastoral Center, Dr. Luke Arredondo. Welcome back.
Very excited to be here. You have no idea.
It is the granddaddy of them all, guys. We put off this episode a little bit. We had our first two episodes of the Catholic Social Teaching series behind us as well, and there's been a gap, but we're here for the big one. It is Rerum Novarum Day.
It is Rerum Novarum Day indeed.
Out of the 847 things that Pope Leo officially wrote, or that's a guesstimate, by the way, but at least 80-something encyclicals.
Yeah, he wrote 86 encyclicals. In fact, if you're watching the video version, subscribe to our YouTube channel so you can see the video version. You can see this really cool volume I've got. I brought it for show and tell today for the 3 people that are going to watch this. This is the most authoritative collection of Leo XIII's encyclicals, only available as part of a 5-volume set that's very expensive. It was a gift to me from the Diocese of Tyler. All 86 encyclicals, hardback. Really proofread. So one of the things I noticed when I was preparing for this episode, there's some strange typos in the Vatican's version.
As there always are.
I want to scribble all over this thing. I don't want to write on this thing. It's very expensive, right? And one type, it said the word arid, and I thought that the word arid doesn't make just any sense at all. So I can go to the official one. It's supposed to be and. Right? It's just a scanning error. So it's helpful for those sorts of things. And I've got my little Pauline printout.
There's, for most of us who are familiar with just the Vatican website or those beautiful little paperback booklets that they make every time that an encyclical comes out, we don't know there's other things out there, but yeah. And don't say the church. You didn't ever get nothing working for the church. You got that beautiful thing over there.
This is a precious book right here. It's very important to me.
Well, speaking of joys, things that bring you great joy, the first line of our podcast, of course, from Gaudium et Spes, the joys, the hopes, griefs, and anxieties of the men of this age, especially those who are poor or in any way afflicted. These are the joys, hopes, griefs, anxieties of the followers of Christ. Look, we are a month in at this point in time. It's late September, mid to late September. The kids have been in school for a while. How's it been going?
It's very different having kids at 2 schools. So we were homeschooled exclusively for a long time, or our kids were homeschooled. I felt like I was homeschooled because I was learning along the way. But they started going to Little Flower Catholic School when we moved here, and they were all 5 of them at the same place. And that was a big change for us to get lunches ready and uniforms and find socks and all that. But now my daughter is at the Chesterton School, and my oldest daughter is at the Chesterton School. So we're going 2 places in the mornings, and I just didn't realize how irresponsible I am as a grown-up. All my responsibilities last year were just get the kids out the door by 7, and then I can get ready for the day. And now I have to try and get ready before 7. So like myself. And that's hard when I'm chasing around kids who don't want to get dressed. I got to find socks and shoes. So it's gone great, but I'm just learning how much more complicated, I guess, almost everybody's lives have been. Yeah. Mine hasn't been that frantic in the mornings, so it's a tough thing. Starting to wake up a little earlier, try and catch up.
Ditto. Griefs and anxieties. That's all we have. 2 schools. Where my daughter's at Pensacola Catholic High School. The other 2 in the middle are at Sacred Heart. Yeah, man. You just don't know what you got till it's gone. One school was dreamland.
Yeah, I did not know that.
So, oh man. Well, guys, we're about to go to school. It is time. We mentioned before, Dr. Luke Arredondo, your doctorate was written literally on the encyclical tradition, the thought of Pope Leo XIII. So this is the granddaddy of them all. We said we talked about in our previous 2 episodes the scriptural and then church patristic origins of Catholic social teaching. But this is the one that if you're going to say origin point of modern Catholic social teaching, here we are. Rerum Novarum. Tell us a little bit, though. So this encyclical comes out 1891. This guy, though, this is not his first encyclical. This is way later.
Right.
Give us the background on this gentleman. Give us his full name, too.
Yeah, so it was Gioacchino Vincenzo Raffaele Luigi Pecci was his given name at birth. His mom called him Vincenzo, so you'll see if you look up like different sort of basic articles about him, or even some biographies, online, they might put Vincenzo as his first name instead of
Gioacchino.
Because that was what his mom called him.
Okay.
So there's a little. Sometimes you'll see it one way, sometimes the other.
Fair enough.
That's the reason. He became Pope in 1878, and this document that we're going to look at today was written, I think, May 15th, 1891. And he wrote a number of encyclicals, obviously, prior to this, and many, many more after. He wrote 86 encyclical letters. But by this point, he had written a major document on Aquinas and sort of the renovation of Christian philosophy in light of Thomas Aquinas. That's Aeterni Patris was his third letter. This is like 1879. He wrote a letter on marriage the following year, I think, 1880. Arcanum. Libertas, one of his major writings about liberty, about human liberty. Humanum Genus. There was another one dealing with more state, sort of church-state issues. He wrote one on communism. So he wrote a number of his biggest hits prior to this letter, right? And we were talking a little bit before we started recording. One of the things that kind of underlays a lot of his major writings is this concern about ideas that are sort of started at the level of the elite, whether that's in universities or public figures. I mean, you might talk like today about how celebrities behave, how they portray ideas, right? So if Taylor Swift, has some like terrible philosophical ruminations about marriage or something, you might, as a father, worry about how that might seep down to your daughters as they repeat the lyrics, right?
Instantly.
So this is the kind of thing Leo XIII was worried about: is philosophers, political figures, heads of state. How did they think about issues? How did they address things like the family, like marriage, like work, labor, these sorts of things? He wanted to protect the normal people, regular people, just everyday common folk, just trying to do their best, from being confused or especially from being lied to or given false promises of hope. This is a common theme in a lot of his different encyclicals. So, his letter about Aquinas, he's talking about popular conceptions of philosophy at the time and how we need Aquinas to kind of steer things in the right direction and prevent helpless little people who are just being told this is what philosophy is about from being, led into sort of crazy territory. In this letter, he is talking about, in a particular way, the relationship between the labor class and the owning class. But he's not so much worried about laws as he is ideas.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that idea of ideas, it's the 19th century. Just a little more context. He's born 1810. He's born under the rule of Napoleon. He's from south of Rome, but it's a time when Napoleon still owns most of Italy or has installed client kingdoms. That's how old
Wow.
This dude is. We'll also know Pope Leo XIII, not only was he I think he's the oldest person still to, well, it'll be forever now, to be captured in motion picture. So
yes.
There's,
it's at least assumed that he's the oldest, because we know how old he was.
Yeah.
Right. Nobody's confused about how old that guy was.
Yeah,
and he's on video. We know who he is.
That's right.
It's possible maybe someone else is on a video and we don't know exactly
their birth date's not
who
as
they
well
are. They weren't a
established.
public figure. So I think it clearly you could say the earliest born, well-known, figure ever on video. Yeah.
Okay. So that gives this idea is seeping down. So he has a long life already. By the time he's written this encyclical, he's what are we talking here? He's 80 years old. 70 years old.
You said he was born in 1810.
1891.
So the 91, so 81?
Watch the theologians do math. Yeah.
I don't know.
There we go.
Derek can check our math and put it on the screen like a number in the actual post-editing. That would be fun.
Just the things, let's just talk about inventions that have happened during his lifetime. Locomotives appear throughout Europe for the first time. The 2-stroke and 4-stroke internal combustible engine appears for the first time. The first workable batteries. This is the time, the mid-1800s, we have the telegraph invented, and they literally lay 3,500 miles of telegraph cable under the Atlantic Ocean to connect America and London.
That is crazy. That's completely nuts to me that they did that.
I read about this. They literally took thousands of miles of cable and just dropped it off at the back of the ship and dropped it on the ocean floor. And that's how London and I think New York would have been the first telegram connection or something like that. So all these things are just happening just technologically. The world is becoming the average person's life, where these things started to have their scientific possibilities in the 16th, 17th, 18th centuries. But now it's actually like seeping into what the average person sees most of their day. They see mechanization and all these kinds of things. But also in the realm of ideas, so he's born under Napoleon and kind of the breakup of that version of old Europe. But communism comes onto the scene when he's a young lad, well, a relatively young person in the 1830s and 40s. The revolutions of Europe that follow in 1848, the French Revolution already happened, but again, those effects that kind of keep seeping. He's also the first pope in like 1,000, maybe like 1,200 years who does not rule like a territory. Yes,
the Papal States had just been lost during Pius IX's pontificate, and Italy was founded, was it like 1868 or something like that?
1870, 71 is when the unification is completed. Okay. That's when Rome gets taken over. So Italy as a state that would,
didn't even exist. Was a new thing still. Yeah. Leo's, during Pius IX's funeral, there was like an attack on the procession, and they almost left Rome for the conclave.
Okay,
when he was elected, because there was so much unrest there. They ultimately decided to stay in Rome because they weren't sure if the Pope could get back in there if they left.
Interesting.
And elected him. Yeah. They didn't know that he would let him come back. Yep. Right. So the political change happening across Europe was a major shakeup for Pius IX, but then Leo XIII is really walking into what Leo XIII walks into at the end of a very long pontificate of Pius IX is a totally different world than what Pius IX inherited when he began his rule as the Pope of the Church. And electricity and gas being used, gas lighting, electricity coming into the Vatican, it was during Leo's lifetime. Yep. They already had electricity before he became the Pope, but it was during his lifetime that went from being dark to light. And he still used candlelight.
Yeah.
His secretary would often find him kind of passed out on his desk with a candle burnt down to a nub, and he would have to blow out the candle real quick. You'd think, I think he's asleep. Let me go check on him, and there'd be a candle burning dangerously close. So Leo XIII frequently almost burned the place down because he was studying and writing at his these old formal desks. I guess I don't know. He just didn't sleep well. It was hard for him to fall asleep, so he would stay up studying and writing.
Geniuses,
I guess
sleep the best. Yeah. So with all that said, I think we've set the stage well. The amount of new things, the amount of new things that this man has seen in his lifetime, and maybe the thing that presses on him the most is, like you said already, that it's affecting the common person in kind of really disturbing ways. And so he decides to write this encyclical. So let's start out. Where are we at the beginning of this encyclical and the first things he wants to establish?
Yeah. So the major concerns for this letter, which is one of his longest, is basically a response to the Industrial Revolution and the changes that the Industrial Revolution has wrought, as you said, for the common man. So there's new questions about the relationship between the working and the owning class, or between labor and capital. There's concerns about the advancement of socialism as a response to some of these problems. The rights of workers, the establishment of unions or guilds. So he talks about the ancient guilds and sort of a desire to renovate those. There's questions about wages and what is a fair wage to pay a laborer. What are fair labor practices beyond just the wage, the hours and the risk and all sorts of other things. And then the church's view of human dignity, because human beings are created in the image and likeness of God. And he makes a powerful argument in this document about the foundation of human dignity being based in our imaging God. So because we are created in the divine image, there's a certain dignity that we have that cannot be trampled. Even if a person agrees to it, it's unjust and it should be avoided. And then what is the church's view for a truly just and flourishing society? At the end of the letter, what he tries to argue is that if society can make these adjustments to all of these questions that he's going to sort of propose, then not only is the church going to be healthier and a better place, but society will function better too. This is one of his mega, or not mega. What's the word? Meta. One of his meta arguments that you see throughout his papacy, that when Christian principles are at a minimum allowed to flourish, right? They don't have to be positively supported or enforced by law, but when the Christian principles are not prohibited from having breathing room, the benefits are not just going to be to the Catholics or the Christians that are going to have the freedom to live the way that their faith tells them. It's actually going to improve conditions for everybody. So it is to the benefit of the common good to let religious principles flourish. So he makes a very long-winded argument that at the end says, look, even if you don't care about Christian principles, if you follow these things, it's going to redound to benefits for society, for the common good.
So he's not establishing a new crusade to take back all of the secular, revolutions that have happened and reestablish. He's like, we can work with the situation, but we've got to think about what people are, what economy is. So it's a very interesting thing because he's not insisting on for instance, the church coming in and taking control of labor practices or, eradicating the state to just have a completely free society. He does try to hold on to some of the situation, some of the reality that is current. So he's a realist in this way, but he also wants to make arguments for a sort of a different vision of things. But he's not trying to go back in time. Right? He does ride on a steam engine, but it doesn't hit 88 miles an hour, and he doesn't want to go back in time. He actually is fascinated. It's going 30 miles an hour, and he writes a letter to someone at home that it seems like, this is the machine age in which man is going to be able to propel himself at limitless speeds. Wow. And he's going 30 miles an hour on a train. So, he's writing this letter when, the rate of change is just accelerating. Not merely lots of things are happening and changing, but the frequency is picking up. So the Industrial Revolution was leading to serious concerns about labor, but he sees bigger picture ideas. So he's worried about things like anthropology, like what is a person? What do we owe to a person in justice? What are a person's rights? And what are the duties that we have to respect the good of the person? What's the end of the person or the good of the person? What's a person for? In other words, what is the role of our faith in the modern world? Like how can religion still be an active force in society? And what is the nature of work? So these are some of the things that are going on in the document. But in particular, he wants to start sort of a new way of addressing these questions, right? New things. That is Rerum Novarum, the Latin term means new things. He wants to apply prudential reasoning to the new things, all this changing stuff that we can't make a permanent decision about, but how do we do that? He wants to say it should be based on human reason and divine revelation. So we use human reason and divine revelation to respond to these new challenges. And the introduction to, Leo's encyclicals, his introductions are friggin' awesome. He just gets right into it.
He's got such great quality as a writer, as a rhetorician, or rhetorician or whatever. And he says basically, well, let me just read the first couple of sentences. It's just, the Pope's so cool that he could talk like this, right? That the spirit of revolutionary change, which has long been disturbing the nations of the world, should have passed beyond the sphere of politics and made its influence felt in the cognate sphere of practical economics is not surprising. The elements of the conflict now raging are unmistakable in the vast expansion of industrial pursuits and the marvelous discoveries of science, in the changed relations between masters and workmen, in the enormous fortunes of some few individuals and the utter poverty of the masses, the increased self-reliance and closer mutual combination of the working classes, and also finally in the prevailing moral degeneracy. And so he says, like, all of this stuff's going on, and we got to come up with some sort of answers to it. Okay. So, yeah, that's how he sets the stage.
Well, one of the first things that he addresses in this philosophical human reason plus divine revelation is something that's off-cited. And this is a great encyclical. Both folks on the left and right find things that are just absolutely...
That's true.
Like, this is it. This is my manifesto. But he takes time at the beginning to talk directly about the question of private property. So if, the communist proposal in its purest form is this sort of, the state should own, or a socialistic principle in general, the state should own the means of production, and private property is, I don't know what the exact terminology is, but sometimes equivalent to theft or immoral or something like that, or always used for ill-gotten gains and the suppression of workers. What does Leo say about property?
Yeah, so one of his primary topics that he gets to is the role of property and private property in the crisis that the Industrial Revolution has presented. So that growing chasm between those who own, to an extravagant extent, enormous amounts of private property and the very poor masses. So what he's trying to get into is that, this is a real problem. This is not an imagined crisis. This is a real deal. There is a small group of men who are amassing unimaginable fortunes, and then there are huge numbers of people, especially in urban centers now, moving to the cities that are destitutely poor, that are working, literally hand to mouth, just barely able to survive, and that problem can't be endured. Okay. The people that are working aren't just gonna keep doing that and they're gonna be fine. The wealthy people are obviously they'll be cool with it, but these poor people they're not gonna put up with this forever. So what's happening, and he's addressing this question in a particular way because socialists are providing, well, here's one way out of this crisis. Like, you're poor, you don't have enough money, these people got too much money. Clearly, here's the answer. We need a revolution wherein we abolish all private property. The state takes possession of it and then gives everybody an equal amount. Yeah. And what Leo, of course, understands is that's not real. That's not an actual situation that can solve this crisis. It will create different problems. It might be somewhat different or a little bit better here and there, but it's just going to create another giant set of problems. So he argues that just based on human reason, we should be able to see that human beings deserve to own property. They deserve permanent ownership of something. Okay. Because human beings have needs that are not exhausted. They have needs that return. And they keep replenishing themselves. And he argues it's only by the possession of a productive property that as human beings we can sort of make it. One of the things that's great about this encyclical is some of the timelessness of it. Yeah. One of the things that's, I think we have to recognize we have to do a little bit of work on now is his frame of mind is you're working in a factory. The only way that you're really going to get anywhere is if you can save enough money to buy some land, grow some food, and then the land will be a benefit to you. Yep. You will have productive property and you won't have to work for someone anymore. So what's today's version of that private property? It's probably not a farm. Yeah. So when you think about the contemporary application, we got to get creative.
And a single family home.
Yeah. Yeah, but you know,
Yeah.
it's a different situation,
Yeah.
right? Does it mean you have enough money to really sock away some money in the stock market,
Sure.
and then the stock market's paying you? Like, I don't know. I don't really know much about the world, really. So I have no ideas about how you could translate this. But his argument is, we need something that we truly own, so that we are no longer in this sort of basically servitude toward an employer.
And it's important to point out, okay, the lives of the poor of Europe, you know, when you think about the caricature of medieval times, it's like these, you know, it's Monty Python. It's this guy who's in the mud and just like picking away at mud and flinging mud at people and stuff. But objectively, for some of the average people, especially in urban centers, their lives, because they were deprived of productive property, they lived in cities and tenement housing that was also far more filthy and kind of morally dangerous and suspect than any kind of feudalistic farming community.
That's true.
Even though those folks were poor and had hard lives and stuff, there was still a dignity to their labor and a direct relationship with their landowners that they worked for, and that relationship had kind of the industrialists.
There was also a sense of community. Right? And critically, seasons
That's right.
of difficult work and seasons of rest.
So
right?
We hear this right. We work more than the average medieval peasant.
Right.
But in 1891, you're working
certainly much more than
6
you and I
days
are
a week,
working.
12 hours a day.
Yeah, very long shifts, very dangerous stuff. So just a little bit more about the private property, though. So he says that you know, the foundation is in the fact that we're created in the image and likeness of God, and that means that we have reason. And through reason, we can see that we need permanent solutions, permanent sustenance in some way, and not merely, you know, going to work, earning, eating, going back to work. We need something that's going to get us on a track where we are sort of freed at some point.
Okay.
But another angle of his argument of the goodness of private property, sort of against the socialists, is that the divine law prohibits us from even not just stealing other people's property, but even desiring it.
Oh,
right? So the commandments say you shall not even covet. So if we shouldn't even covet, we certainly shouldn't be arguing that nobody ought to own anything. Or we're supposed to respect other people's possessions enough that we don't covet them. So his basic impulse is that the very real problems that the Industrial Revolution has caused cannot simply be solved by abolishing private property. So a new thing has to be brought forward to get the discussion past this obstacle. And he says it's, you know, the human family is the original society, and the justice that's due to a family for the sake of survival implies a right to ownership of land and protection against the state from interfering with that right. So he really thinks that the possession of private property, not only is it something that the state shouldn't interfere with, it's something that precedes the state.
Okay.
So the state doesn't.
He doesn't just, the king doesn't just grant charters. You can buy some of the property in my territory.
Right. No. As human nature attests to the fact that we ought to be able to possess the land. And that, I mean, you see that in Genesis, right? To inherit and have dominion over the land. The practical ways in which the land is divided, of course, he says, is, you know, that's something that human reason has to kind of be involved with. But the point is, this is a divine right that's given to us in our humanity to have property, to have a possession of land and a share in the earth. Also, those who have incredible resources have a duty to share that.
Okay, so this is a huge, you highlighted in the outline that we're looking at here. We're not called to class warfare and social revolution. We're called to mutual complementarity. We're called to an understanding of the working class he acknowledges exists, the owning industrial class exists. So what do they have to do with one another? How do they interact? What do they do?
Well, one of the things that Leo does in this encyclical is he sort of traces out competing ways of seeing this. Okay. So he basically says there are some people today advocating for revolution who want to say that the only way that we can get past this difficulty is to foment a war of sorts between the owning classes and the poor. So in other words, it's mutual suspicion, right? And he shows patiently through several pages of the document that that's inadequate and unjust to sort of say it's one against the other. We all share one human nature. We're all part of one human family. So clearly we can't be in competition or violent conflict with one another. So then he wants to move from there to a fundamental respect of dignity and differences.
Okay.
To acknowledge, for the wealthy, to acknowledge that the poor are good. Right? They're not wretched and they're poor because they're so lazy or they didn't apply themselves. That it's not a moral quality to be poor, or it's not a moral punishment or category. And to be wealthy is not a virtuous category to be in.
Okay.
These are circumstances of their life that are independent of virtue or vice, right? So he wants to move to that stage. And then if we can get there, he wants to say, but Christian charity calls us to something more, which is mutual love, and to see each other as, united in a fraternal spirit as members of one body. So he's trying to say that the typical way that things are being framed by socialists and others is, this is just a warfare. And he says, we're not just supposed to get out of a war. We're supposed to unite as one human family, acknowledging human dignity and seeing that these differences that exist between the economic classes do not override the fundamental unity that we have as members of the same species.
So, in the not to romanticize Christendom, but in the ideal, if it ever existed, Catholic Christendom kind of space, you would have had rich and poor, but the rich aristocracy would have been bound by this sense of respect and responsibility toward their fellow Christian subjects. King St. Louis IX, of France, the sainted king would have been the guy who's like, I'm going to go out and visit my people, and I'm going to invite the poor to my coronation dinner and stuff. And this is truly informative. But there's an attitude that's existed, especially in the era of self-made men who kind of came from nothing but have built up their lives, that this is a new attitude. It's kind of like, if you're poor, it's your own fault. And you're kind of like, this isn't kind of like a state of life that you've been born into, perhaps. But, if you want to make something of yourself and get some money, well, stop being so lazy, and that kind of disrespect, that attitude has entered into things. And the reactionary idea in that, and they were like, well, forget those industrialists. We're going to show them what's possible. We're going to pick up some pitchforks, some rifles, and they're going to feel the pain,
Yeah.
So that kind of, that embitterment has to be done away with.
Yeah, I think contemporary readers of Rerum Novarum will probably see Leo's sort of being okay with the fact that there are rich and there are poor as like an indictment against him. This old European man who says, well, there's just going to be some poor people and some wealthy people, and we can't all be rich people, as though he's just like blithely unconcerned for them. And he's not unconcerned, but he is a realist. There are differences among people. Yeah. Some people have different talents and temperaments and abilities, circumstances, and that's a real thing. People don't just exist in a world where we're all the same in outcomes and talents and inclinations and all that stuff. Health, even. See, that's not where Leo says we have our true dignity and unity. Right, so that is a realm where there's difference. We should have our unity, he says, in virtue.
Okay,
that is the universal inheritance that we all are capable of achieving. The wealthy just as much as the poor. You mentioned something earlier about sort of the squalor and the moral kind of risk of the urban centers and cities, and that's interesting. I'm reading a book by Father Stephen Koth from the University of Notre Dame about suburbs, when the suburbs developed, and Catholic commentary in that time was saying this about cities, that there were dangerous and morally risky environments, and that language has existed around cities. Leo, interestingly, says it's just as possible for a rich man to be virtuous as it is for a poor man. Wow. Right? We shouldn't look at either category, wealthy or poor, and say, oh, you can't be virtuous. So this is where he wants to find the unity of the human race as brothers and sisters united in virtue. And he also makes it clear that the church's perspective is not, we have to make sure that these poor, suffering individuals understand, look, your spiritual life is all that matters. as long as you're going to church and you're saying your prayers, like you just got to kind of put up with it, man. You put up with all your poverty and your pain, and one day you're going to get to go to heaven. He wants to unite the material and spiritual well-being. So it's a very fascinating text in its complexity, because he is not simply saying the wealthy don't need to change anything and the poor don't need to change. They both need to change. The wealthy people need to be more generous. They need to be more respectful of their working class. He actually lists out in one of the paragraphs sort of the responsibilities and duties of the working class toward their owners, or capital, and then the responsibilities of the owning class toward the poor. I don't know if I mix those up, but so he says specifically, I'm going to read a couple of these. These are things that the owning class need to do and be aware of. First, they should not look upon their people, their work people, as their bondsmen, but they should respect in every man his dignity as a person ennobled by Christian character. They should not shame their employees for working, because working is an honorable thing to do. I mean, I don't know what it would be like to have so much money that you look at someone and go, oh, you work for a living? Gosh, you poor, miserable sap. But he's telling these people that are employing people, don't talk bad to them because they have to go to work.
Wow.
You need these people.
Yeah,
this is one of Leo's, strong arguments, is that the wealthy really heavily depend on the labor of these poor.
Okay.
The function of the state for industry, for, services like, plumbing and streets and electricity, that's highly dependent, not on the wealthy, but on the poor.
Yeah.
Right? And so Leo will argue that the wealthy have a serious moral duty. He's not interested in making it a legal obligation, but a strong moral duty to treat these people better, because your wealth only comes from them. Your whole life, your whole world that you assume you have available at your fingertips every day is only possible because of these people. Mm-hmm. We see, modern examples of this every now and then. Last year, sometime there was I don't know if it even happened, but the dock workers were threatening to go on strike, and maybe they went on strike for like a day or two or something, and it screwed up the entire country for a couple of days,
Teacher strikes happen pretty often still.
Teacher strikes. Any kind of strike like that is a demonstration by those who are often in pretty low positions that they're just not being given basic justice. Yep. And when they take that strong action, it demonstrates precisely Leo's point about how much society depends on these poor, on these low-class people. And if we need them that much, why don't we treat them better?
Yeah. So as solutions, so that's the responsibility, and you hear some words, and you already mentioned in the beginning: unions, guilds, wages.
Yeah.
What does he propose as is within the human rights? And then we're not even using the language of human rights here, but just as people made in the Imago Dei, workers especially. What do they have the possibility to look at as far as solutions? Can they unionize? Can they advocate? What do we have here?
Okay, so let's talk about guilds and unions first, and then we'll talk about wages, even though the document goes in a different order. One of the things laid out in the very beginning of the document is, that because these ancient workmen's guilds have been destroyed, Christians that are in these occupations are, kind of like, they don't have any support. They don't have anyone to help them. Then later in the document, he says this is something we've got to resurrect, revamp. Unions or guilds, he uses the word guilds. The English translation uses the word guilds. I don't really know. I haven't looked at the language of, is there a difference between a union and a guild? Right.
What you're basically looking at is, especially in medieval Christianity, every town would have had like their wool producer, cloth producer guild, their blacksmiths guild, these types of deal. Now, they're not like these pan-national organizations or something like that, but they're powerful, especially local organizations that mutually benefit one another and stick up for one another or against each other in some instances. But but they're gone.
So he argues that these need to be restored, but then he also has these notes that like there are some places where there are civic bodies of some sort or organized societies around a certain profession that already do exist, but we got to be careful as Catholics. They might have some requirements for membership, or they might have some governing philosophies that are not compatible with the gospel. And if that is the case, he says you've got to make the difficult decision between joining one of them and just kind of going along with whatever the problem is, or you may ostracize yourself by not joining it. You leave yourself with no sort of insurance, no sort of background. But he proposes a third option, a new thing, which is start your own Catholic version of this.
Okay.
So he called, and I know I texted you. Do you know of any examples of this?
Yeah.
I don't really know if that's happened, but it's clearly Leo's wish.
In Europe, there is a strong tradition of this. In the United States, I think I texted about, well, Legatus is the Catholic businessman's guild in some respect.
Right.
It's more like a networking community. We don't have as people would correct me. I'm sure there's more expert folks who are like, no, you don't understand. This union in the United States was actually started all by Catholics or something like that. Yes, but it over in Europe, there's especially like there's still like industrial guilds were kind of Catholic at the core, so to speak.
Yeah, I just recently, just like a couple of days ago, got an email from someone who's the president of the Catholic Lawyers Guild of Tampa.
Okay, yeah.
And they asked me to come give a lecture on Leo XIII. So, I mean, I was like, well, look, a guild. And I wrote, I said, hey, you have a guild. Leo XIII would love that. He loves guilds. Yeah. But so his idea is, as human beings, we need to be in community with others. He's anti-individualist. You shouldn't be on your own as a plumber or a blacksmith or an electrician or whatever. You should have some sort of voice, some sort of society that's organized, that is freely joined, and that is, elects its leaders. And those leaders need to work for the common good of their members. And that this is not something that the state probably is going to be very good at. The state has its role, but it probably isn't going to be to support specific groups of workers, because then who's going to be the favorite group one week or the next, and who's going to be really making the decisions? Probably not the workers, right? So the local workers need to be, have their voice. So this he sees is really important. You know what he says though these guilds are supposed to do? The most important quality that Leo argues for of a guild is to provide catechesis.
That's amazing.
To provide catechesis on what is expected of you, what you should believe. So like teaching the gospel, how you should behave, encouraging you to frequent the sacraments, especially the Eucharist and confession, and to support you in your spiritual life. And then also to provide some sort of benevolence or insurance for your family if something happens to you at work. So it's like, we think of the Knights of Columbus as an insurance, right?
Yeah.
And it is. But I think if you talk to, I forget the guy's name now, the president of the Knights of Columbus in the U.S., Carl, is it still Carl Anderson?
He's been succeeded by somebody else.
Yeah. So let's say, Carl, hey, what's the function of the Knights of Columbus? I don't think he's really going to say it's an insurance company.
Oh, yeah.
He's going to say something more fundamental about, Christian community, the gospel, fellowship. That's what Leo says a guild would be for, is primarily to teach a group of plumbers or electricians or whatever how to live their faith in the world that they live in. It's very much Lumen Gentium 70 years early.
Okay.
Right?
We got to make lay Catholics impact the world where they are. That's fascinating.
And they have other parts, right? But that's the main thing. So we're talking about guilds a little bit. Now, wages. Wages is another major focus in this conversation, and he says some interesting things. So one of the things that he argues is that, look, you can get people to agree to a wage, and without coercion, say, "Hey, here's how much I'll pay you. Will you work for that?" And they say yes. He goes, that does not make a wage fair. Just because you can find someone desperate enough to work for what you promise them, and you do pay them what you promise them as an employer, that doesn't mean you've done your due. Your due is more than merely agreeing to a term. The term itself needs to be fair and needs to be adequate to support the person working. And he says that, work is personal. We put ourselves into our work. And so, You could argue, well, this person decides to work for a low amount, then that's acceptable. He says, but it's not, because work is also necessary for survival. And if you work and can't survive, then you are not working for a just wage.
Okay.
So what does he suggest then would be a way of sort of assessing wages more fairly? So he says, this is paragraph 46 in the Vatican printout, the scholarly one. Interestingly, I want to mention this. If you've got this Pauline little printout, these paragraph numbers are different. So it'd be very frustrating for you to figure out what anybody else is talking about. So go with the Vatican's printout, or, acquire this if you're one of those members of Legatus and you've got nice books like this. Anyways, paragraph 46. We're going to sink down here a little bit on wages. I'll read this text because it's very nuanced. So he says, if a workman's wages be sufficient to enable him comfortably to support himself, his wife, and his children, he will find it easy, if he be a sensible man, to practice thrift, and he will not fail, by cutting down expenses, to put by some little savings, and thus secure a modest source of income. Nature itself would urge him to do this. We have seen that this great labor question cannot be solved save by assuming a principle that private ownership must be held sacred and inviolable. The law, therefore, should favor ownership, and its policy should be to induce as many as possible of the people to become owners. Whoa. So he clearly sees there's a couple of things here that are it's there, but let's just bring it out. A wage is fair when it is enough to survive on and save for some sort of future security.
For a whole family.
For a whole family, yes.
Wow.
So one person working, and he envisions that to be a man. And you'll see Catholic social teaching documents up to John Paul II. They don't talk about this all the time, but this is still the default assumption. Yeah. Until a pope says otherwise, that's kind of the frame of mind that the church has. Doesn't mean women, are forbidden from working. Yeah. But this is the language, and I want to be fair to Leo. That's what the text says. A family wage, in other words, is the presumption of what a just wage would be, and not merely to survive, but to it does take virtue on the part of the employee.
Got to thrift
to not spend it frivolously, right? So that's I think he's talking to both the owning class and the laborers. Like, look, both of y'all need to do a little bit better here.
If you're going to the tavern as soon as your shift ends and drinking all your day's wages away, you can't be like, hey, pay me more. It's like you have to practice virtue.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. Yeah. So with thrift, by cutting down expenses and putting away some little savings, he should be able to secure himself a future. Even natural law urges this, right? Mm-hmm. So he says this is kind of the goal. Now, elsewhere, he talks about the fact that wages, we talked about this a little bit. I'm just getting a little bit mixed up. Just because someone agrees to a wage doesn't make it a fair wage. Yep. So a wage needs to be considerable to the whole of life. In other places, though, he says for employers, you're not just paying a number, you also need to provide a circumstance in which the work is doable. So he says, you need to consider the conditions of the work, right? So if you're working in a coal mine, you should be treated differently in terms of what's expected of you at work, in terms of your schedule and your rest. If you're a teller at a bank, you should be able to go to work every day for 8 hours. Or whatever, like a normal whole day of work, and you get a day off here, maybe 2 days, whatever, you should be fine. Like, you shouldn't have any complaints. But if you are digging coal out of the earth, you should not have to work the same kind of hours, and you should have more frequent rest so that your body can recuperate, and you don't become, like a candle burnt at both ends. You're going to be used up, and in 5 years, you can't work anymore. So Leo wants employers to respect the kind of work being done, the conditions under which it is done, the weather and the climate even, and to allow for adequate rest for the mind to be able to be freed from work.
Wow.
That's the way he puts it. You should, in other words, have enough time off from work that your mind is not still there.
Yeah.
That you are truly at leisure. You should be able to go to Mass on Sunday and all holy days of obligation as a default. Everybody.
Yep.
Every employer ought to allow that. And he doesn't mean only Catholic employers.
Yeah.
Right? He really means anybody ought to see to it that if you treated your employees this way, what would happen? He says 3 things would happen. First, you'd have better equity. If you're paying people better, there would be less sort of division between the owner and the worker. Like you wouldn't look as sort of enviously at your employer if they treated you justly with a good wage, a family wage, they gave you time off and all that stuff. You would increase productivity because people would be no longer laboring under such difficult conditions. Okay. So their productivity would increase, and you would improve patriotism because people would be less likely to try and get somewhere else to find better treatment. And so if you do all 3 of those things, what happens? The entire society improves.
Yeah. And this is a phenomenon of the time, this mass migration from Europe, especially Italy. This is kind of the start of the height where people just run away, and like you just see like the best, if you're looking at who can work the best and the most and be most productive, they're just gone. They're just like, I'm out of here, searching, sometimes to be treated worse in the country they find themselves in. But nevertheless, but like if you don't do this, people are gonna straight up not just if they can't leave your job, they're gonna leave your country. So, maybe we can land on this. These are some, I think, eminently reasonable proposals and predictable outcomes. What role does the state have, according to Leo? I think you mentioned already, he quotes something that says the law should favor ownership or something like that. So,
yes,
does he propose a kind of the invention whole cloth of the social safety net provided by the government and taxation, all these kinds of things, or coercive moves against industrialists, or what are we looking at here?
Yeah, what's interesting in this encyclical is he's not looking directly at the state to provide a solution to all these problems. He's very savvy about when to press things in that way. He does think that it is the state that should be considering the individual good as a service to the common good.
Okay.
So, one of his arguments is that frequently, people in political power will be thinking about kind of like the whole society. And that may give you some animus to say, well, let's just give everybody, equal property. That's where socialism is coming from. That way everybody is equal. And he wants to say you should let individuals flourish so that the state doesn't have as many problems to deal with, right? He calls for intermediary bodies to provide sort of layers of protection and insurance. He does think that the church is an indispensable part, but that the state needs to be involved in certain ways. But he says the state can only be effective if it has a proper sense of the goals of the state, which is to serve the common good through providing for the circumstances that allow for the individual to flourish according to his true human nature. So he's encouraging the state to, for instance, foster religious, observance on the part of their workers and that sort of thing. But the state should have a special concern for the poor because it is society as a whole that so desperately needs the poor. This is one of the things that's really, I don't know, you just don't think about it. Like if you're reading Dickens or something about like the life of the poor, it just sounds like it's just misery and squalor, but like it's invisible too. They're just sort of there, and then who cares? Nobody needs them. But Leo's argument is actually the state really depends on these people to show up and do the difficult jobs that they're doing. So, for instance, he says strikes are legitimate, right? But the state should really try and prevent strikes by taking active measures to ensure that the poorest of people are given reasonable treatment. So one of the things he certainly would advocate for is better hours, better safety in places of employment, keeping children out of danger, and he means physical danger as well as moral danger, to just make that the way things are. Because when you don't, you have many more people vulnerable to abuse that are then going to wind up in such a bad position that they're just a drain on everybody. They're causing, more problems. You should get ahead of it, in other words, right? So you got a little leak and you're like, don't worry about it, we'll fix it later. If you just let it go, it can become a major problem. So he's kind of looking at it this way. Let me read a defensive, or an excerpt here where he talks about this. So he says, is paragraph 38, it is expedient to bring under special notice certain matters of moment. First of all, there is the duty of safeguarding private property by legal enactment and protection. Most of all, it is essential where the possession of greed is so strong to keep the populace within the line of duty. For if all may justly strive to better their condition, neither justice nor the common good allows any individual to seize upon that which belongs to another, or, under the futile and shallow pretext of equality, to lay violent hands upon other people's possessions. Then he later says that there are not a few who are imbued with evil principles and eager for revolutionary change, whose main purpose is to stir up disorder and incite their fellows to acts of violence. So what he's trying to say is that the state really ought to jump in and provide concrete solutions for these people that are in this difficult position, the laborers particularly, because if they don't, there are plenty of people ready and willing to sort of take advantage of that suffering and of that greed and orient it towards something. But this is another meta thing for Leo. He's always worried about false or empty promises of salvation. The real salvation, Leo thinks, is in grace and virtue, right? But it's frequent that there are people providing alternatives that appear to be a salvation to your right now problem. The church is always talking about eternity, but also, Leo is concerned about material goods and possessions and, like their practical needs. But he says there's a lot of people out there that are promising, look, there's a way out of this. You've been on Facebook. I don't know if you get these. I don't know if you get different kind of emails than I get, but I get a lot of people that think I'm really desperately trying to be an entrepreneur who creates a product and sells it on Kajabi. And if I can just sell 30,000 of something, I quit my job and, be my own boss. And I think that's like, no offense to people that are actually good at that, but that seems to me to be a little bit of an empty promise.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, look, if you just invest this money in this software and then you put your great idea in it, it's gonna and then you get this in front of people, you'll get rich, and then you don't have to work. And so
he says it earlier on. He says, basically in 18, it says the other plains and hardships of life will have no end or cessation on earth. For the consequences of sin are bitter and hard to bear. They must accompany man so long as life lasts.
Yes. It's eminently realist, while trying with all the sort of careful concern and sort of deliberations about how far should he push things to make things better.
Yep.
But he recognizes this like sort of the integralist thing where we have natural and supernatural ends, and we want to care for the natural ends and the supernatural ends. We're in our natural ends. Guess what? It's the Valley of Tears, man. Some kind of way your life's going to suck. Nobody's life doesn't suck when you really look at it. And that's the thing. Like, that's hard to kind of get your mind around. Like, that's not a great lesson when I'm trying to, I try and tell this to my kids, and I tell them like that, like, they're like, oh, we're going to do my chores. I'm like, listen, life sucks, all right? It's going to be suffering and pain, and then one day, it'll be over and it'll be good. This is kind of Leo's message in much softer tones. Like, we'll never get out of suffering.
Yeah.
We got to do the best we can, and we should try and get rid of envy. Envy's bad. Greed's bad.
This is fascinating.
Treating people without justice, terrible. But, we're not going to make everybody happy.
The spiritual damage integrated with the flesh, but the spiritual damage is to what you should worry about. What Jesus says, do not worry about who can kill the body, but who can kill the soul.
Yeah.
Is right there. Well, Fats, we could go, this could be a 7-parter. We're going to have to stop there. We still leave it on another cliffhanger. We've seen Pope Leo, all the kernels and all the seeds that will be germinated and watered and grown over the next century are already here. Fascinating. And we're going to pick it up next time, 40 years later.
Yes.
With Quadragesimo Anno.
Yeah, let me say one more thing just to kind of put a pin on this. So in the papal tradition of Catholic social teaching, what distinguishes that from moral theology?
Okay.
Right? And I'm convinced it's this, that there is a different method of engagement, right? So if you read, for instance, a document like Veritatis Splendor or Evangelium Vitae of John Paul II, it's Evangelium Vitae, right? Talking about like the culture of death, right? Culture of life, culture of death. Talks about the death penalty in there and abortion and euthanasia and some other things. John Paul II's language about the Catholic attitude towards those problems is very doctrinal, very strong, very clear and stable. Like, this is the Catholic view on these things. We have to reject them. Absolutely. And these are all the reasons why. In the Catholic social teaching tradition, what you're going to see is popes writing about very different kinds of problems that we don't know, they don't know. Leo doesn't know how long the Industrial Revolution is going to last, how long these are going to be real crazy problems that just everyone's dealing with, right? And in every successive document, it's a pope looking at a sort of new angle of social problems and trying to use perennial teachings like the commandments, the sacraments, the scriptures, the lives of the saints, all of these things, virtue, to respond in a prudential way to some pressing issue. But they don't issue commands or new sort of doctrines very, very frequently within this realm because they're dealing with new things, changing circumstances. And so if you're playing the at-home game with us and you read these documents, what you're going to see is just popes doing their best to respond to some kind of new difficulty. And it's a very fascinating sort of genre of papal teaching.
How awful it would have been if in 1891 Pope Leo had said, "It is under pain of mortal sin that every industrialist must give away 5% of their earnings to the poor," and set that as like the forever rate or something. Might have been great at the time.
Sure.
But how much, effective tax rates change, needs of people change, the number of human beings that exist that have to be provided for change.
Yes. And so I think it's an important principle to be aware of when you're reading these documents, right? It doesn't mean that, it's like, well, you don't have to listen to it. But this is like papal, this is like the church discerning the signs of the times, right? And we can look back for hundreds of years, well over 100 years, and see what this looks like. Mm-hmm. And I think it's a good model for us of dealing with whatever new pressing problems we're going to face. And I'm really excited to see how Leo XIV kind of enters into this conversation, because I'm sure he's working on something.
That is, oh, I can't wait. Who knows, by the time we send out our next podcast, that might be out already or something. We'll have to do an emergency podcast. Luke, this is such a joy to have someone with an expertise on the granddaddy of them all. Is such a gift to our diocese. So thanks for taking the time to research this and digest it for us and put it back out in eminently understandable and fun terms. Guys, Gaudium et Spes, such a joy to have you along with us. We'll be back in 2 weeks' time, another episode of the podcast with Bishop Bill as he talks about the Congregation of the Holy Cross. And we'll see you then.
Thank you for tuning in today to the Gaudium et Spes podcast. If you would like to know more about our podcast, please visit our website, gaudiumετspes.net, or go to ptdiocese.org and click the button that says podcast. If you listen to the audio version from an app such as Apple Podcast, Spotify, or iHeartRadio, be sure to rate, review, and comment. If you watched us on YouTube, be sure to like and subscribe, or leave us a comment there as well. Thank you for joining us.